Today, we're talking about a new national initiative known as the Music Teacher Profession Initiative. What is it? Find out on today's PMEA's Take Note podcast. Hello, everybody. I'm Mark Despotakis, and welcome to this edition of Take Note. Very excited today that we have with us Deb Confredo. I'm going to bring her in now. Deb, if you're in Pennsylvania, yeah, you know her. You've known her, I'm sure. But she's a professor at Temple University and currently is the President-Elect of the National Association for Music Education, NAfME. Deb, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I appreciate it.
And just for the fun trivia, you're in Louisiana.
I am in Louisiana. Yeah, we moved here in 2019, and we love Pennsylvania. We had to kind of get out of the snow. Plus, we like to dance, and we can dance down here every night of the week if we want to. So, there's a little method to our madness. Yep.
Fair enough. Yeah. So we wanted to have you on today to talk about something that I hope that a lot of folks have heard about, an initiative coming out of NAfME, the Music Teacher Profession Initiative. And we'll be referring it to as the MTPI because we all live in the world of acronyms. So What's one more, right? So let's start with, I always like to level set, tell us what it is.
Sure. Yeah, well, so you're right. And thank you for sharing what the acronym means, because I'm really bad at that. So thank you for that. Yeah, the Music Teacher Profession Initiative. I'll give you a really, really quick history of this. Back in 2020, remember when we were all sort of in lockdown, and this was the fall of 2020, Dr. Maggie Spradley, who was NAfME president at the time, was hosting a bunch of town hall meetings. We were talking about some of the issues that surrounded music education at the time, primarily focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I went to several of them, and long about the third one, I was starting to hear some of the same concerns coming back over and over again from different people. So I talked to Matt, or I asked a question at the third one. I said, well, what do we do now? I sort of wanted to push us into some ideas about action items. And Mackie, in her grace and infinite wisdom, says, why don't you take care of this one? So she allowed me to form a committee. And so the MTPI was born with a bunch of colleagues who had some similar concerns about what was going on, or perhaps what was not going on in music education and music teacher education. So we started our work in January of 2021. We took about 6 months together to decide what we were going to do together and really what our charge was. And so the intent was to look at growing the profession to be more representative of students in our schools today. So if you look at the statistics on who we are just generally as a music teaching population, we're largely white and we're largely female. And our student constituency across the country really doesn't match that. And so we're asking the question, why is it that our music teaching population is a very thin slice of the whole population across the United States? So we wanted to look at that, and we also wanted to look at issues of recruitment. Why aren't we getting to a lot of kids who may be great teachers? And then on the other end, we wanted to talk about retaining good people. Mark, I know you know this as well as probably everybody in our profession. Those first 5 years in the profession I call them the golden years, right? It's not, usually people talk about the golden years being retirement years. I talk about those first 5 years of teaching as the golden years, primarily because those are the years when we decide to stay or go. And it's a critical time in a young professional's life, and we need to look at those things as priority for us. And it all shakes out into how well we do for the students in front of us. So we had our charge, and then we tried to figure out how we were going to address the charge, because you could have entered it at any point in time or with any constituency group. We could have gathered PK-12 teachers across the country, or arts educators, arts administrators, or there's lots of different groups. We decided to start. Now, remember, this is, the MTPI work is the tip of the iceberg. It's not an end point. It is a beginning point. It's a stepping off point. we decided to talk to music teacher education faculty from across the country about what their perceptions are about the barriers to our profession before. So when kids are in school, right? So middle school, junior, high school, what are the barriers that they think kids are bumping up against that prevent them from going into schools for music? What are the barriers that they perceive are contained within the degree program? And then what are the barriers that they perceive that young people bump into in those first 5 years of professional life? So we didn't want it to be all doom and gloom, right? We wanted to be able to give people an opportunity to share with us their ideas about how those things could be mitigated. So we had both those pieces that we looked at. We ended up talking to a ton of faculty from 24 institutions across the country. Every NAfME division is represented. We had eight HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities represented, as well as HSIs, Hispanic serving institutions, because and that was intentional because we really wanted the voices of those folks who teach marginalized populations to be included. And the other group we included, and this was in June of 2022, sort of toward the end of all data collection, was the national leadership. So we had the same conversations with the folks at the National Assembly, and of course they represent PK-12 teachers from across the country, and so those data got folded into the report. And I'm giving the Reader's Digest version. So what we did then was to take all those data and to compile them into a pretty complex and hefty report, which can be found on the NAfME website. It's called a Blueprint for Strengthening the Music Teacher Profession. And what you'll find in there are the perceptions of all the folks we talked to, the suggestions for how those things might be mitigated. And then at the very end, we have a sort of a homework section for people who have a dog in the fight, right? So what can students do? What can PK-12 teachers do? What can university professors do? What can state and federal government do? What can school officials, principals, guidance counselors, arts administrators, what can they do? Community members, families, what can all of those folks do to help sort of move the needle so that our profession becomes far more robust in terms of who we teach and what we teach, right? And the issue about what we teach is important because if we're teaching a far more diverse population of folks who we put out into the schools to carry on the work that we're doing now, but they go into programs that are just very traditional and there's no room for expansion, that's problematic. So we need to look at music education curricula at all levels. So that's kind of the Reader's Digest version. I'm sure we can talk more about it as we keep moving along here.
Yeah, so I mean that's a great starter explanation of it. So I want to dive into some pieces of it. So you talked a bit about how the report in some ways is kind of broken into the before the degree program, during the degree program, and then I like this the golden years, as they enter their profession. So one of the things that is spelled out in the report are the challenges.
Right.
But then you're smart enough to say, but we're just not going to say it's too complicated and walk away from this. We're going to say what are some of the mitigations.
Right.
So I'm curious if you could share some of the kind of the standout ones there, because it's really interesting as you were taking this from across the country. That sometimes we say, well, that's only in our pocket of the country that's an issue. So I'm curious then for maybe if some that stood out to you that then are nationwide.
Sure, and that's a great observation, Mark. And I would say this: what we found was, and I'll go back to reminding everybody that we talked to people from all across the country for exactly the reason that you're talking about, Mark. That some things in say Nevada may be quite different from some things that are happening in New Jersey and everywhere in between, right? What we found was that there was this great singularity of thinking across the country about certain things. In addition to that singularity, there were other things that were specific to area. Now, we didn't break it down by area, but those things did make it into the report, because when they bubbled up to the top as truly, that came back to us over and over and over again from folks in those areas, right? So in other words, put another way, there was a lot that we garnered from our discussions with all these folks, and each discussion was about 2 hours long. And there were, things in there that maybe some suggestions that didn't quite make the final report. What we tried to do after all the data we're in was to look at everything that we got and find those emerging themes, the things that really seem to be top of mind for folks. But you're absolutely right. There are differences that would speak to who's teaching and where they're teaching. So the thing that we heard over and over and over again, and this is going to be of no surprise to anybody, was the inequitable distribution of resources, both financial resources, human resources, and physical resources, right? So think about, and I know we're talking to primarily Pennsylvania folks here, think about the wide spectrum of where we teach in Pennsylvania. And I don't mean just, from up towards Lake Erie to down to Philadelphia. What I'm also talking about here is, schools that are brand new and other schools that have been around for almost a century, and can we retrofit, and what are the problems, and right? So, and also the tax base, right? So if we're living in a town where the tax base is not enough to support some of the things that we're suggesting, then that's an issue that we have to address. So physical resources being where we are teaching, human resources being not just the teacher, but also the assistants to the teacher. And by that, I mean other teachers in the school district. If we need parents to come in and help, those kinds of things, administrative assistance, all those issues that would help us to do our jobs better. And of course, at the bottom, when everything shakes out, of course, there's money, with the dollar sign. In addition to that, we heard people talk about the challenge of participation expenses, right? And so, particularly if you're talking about instrumental participation, of course, if we're in a choral ensemble, maybe a little less of participation expense that's incurred there. If you're playing a cello, or if you're playing a tuba, it's going to be a little difficult for you if your family is not of means for you to be able to participate. So that was a barrier. Private instruction expenses. Now, this kind of leaks us over, Mark, into getting into schools of music, right? And so if I want to get into a school of music, the first thing I've got to do is pass an audition, the way things are set up right now. And so if I don't have the wherewithal financially to participate in private instruction to help me to get past that barrier, that can keep really good people out of our programs. In addition to that, this is particularly true in, I'm going to generalize here. So there's always exceptions, but in rural areas and in urban areas, there may be limitations to access to affordable transportation. So if where I need to go for private instruction, or where I need to go for participation in ensembles is far from where I live, and I don't have the means to get there, that could keep me out as well. Limited curricular offerings. And what we mean by this is, the folks talk to us at length about, we love our large, more traditional ensembles. I mean, most of us, I would go out on a limb and say most of us do what we do today because we had such a wonderful experience in one or several large ensembles. And so that to me is key to keeping us cohesive as a music education family, right? To stop there, though, I think is really to miss a lot of people who don't see themselves in those large ensembles. And so what can we do in the middle schools, in the elementary schools, in the high schools to expand our curricular offerings so that more kids can see themselves not just participating, but can see themselves as a teacher once they get out of high school. So development of a singular musical literacy is also something that keeps us from gathering people to our fold. And what I mean by that is we're really good about embracing the kid who's a good reader, we'll teach their ears. We'll get, when we go to college, we'll teach your ear. But turn that around. If I'm a good, if I use my ear really well, I can play and perform by ear, but my reading is not so good. We are kind of loath to teach that person once they get to college. The expectation is they already know that. And that to us, well, I shouldn't say to us, but to the people who responded to our project, that was a real bias, right? Also, and we just talked about this privately before we got on the call here. The negative perception of the teaching profession right now. That's a real problem, not just for music educators. That's a problem nationally for all potential teachers. So there's this feeling of mistrust and apprehension because of what people may or may not get into. I could go on, and that's just at the before I get into the degree program, right? I mean, I think I've kind of maybe gone far afield from your question, so you want to come back and we'll.
Well, no, yeah, no. I mean that's that's important what you're saying, of course, because we could probably stay on here for quite a long time and list every single challenge. But I would invite people to go and first of all, they know most of them.
Yeah.
But I would invite them to go and read the report and take a look at that. So the report is then saying, look, we have identified these challenges in this particular span of music education. This is not this. If we do all of this, this doesn't solve everything, right? Because you make the point earlier. This is the starting point. Yes. Okay, so here's some challenges. Here's some potential mitigations. I think some of those mitigations are happening in some places.
Yes.
They're not happening everywhere for various reasons. And you'd have to look at every situation. But how does this go into a larger movement? Because people will look at this and say, okay, great idea, but how does this grow?
Yeah, and that is the gazillion-dollar question, right? And you're right. And thank you for encouraging folks to read the report, because you're absolutely right. It is chock full of potential ways we can get at these problems. And if anybody who reads it says, I can do that one, that's a good thing. So how do we make it? How do we make the movement grow? We're doing that right now. Frankly, we are. Once the report was out and about, right? Once it was in the ether, what we wanted to do, when I say we, I'm talking about not just the music teacher profession initiative, not just the group of us, but also NAfME leadership. What we wanted to do was to be able to provide avenues, venues for folks to sort of grab on and say, hey, I can do this, and let's go with it. And so what we did at National Assembly this year, in 2023, was we had 3 sessions. People went from room to room. I think the sessions were maybe 90 minutes long. And the one room was, what can we do for the problems in, before the degree program? What we can, and then the second room was during, and the third one was after. And we asked people to think about what could be done in 3 different buckets, right? So the first one was, what can be done immediately, like tomorrow? Something that can be done from your perspective as an individual or as part of a group that's not going to cost a lot of money and we can do right now, right? The second one was in the near term. So these are a little bit larger initiatives that may take maybe a year to put together, maybe 9 months to put together. But again, very doable, very achievable. And then the last column was what's going to take a lot more time, some more robust initiatives that are going to maybe stand further in perpetuity, right? So those 3 things. And we got just a plethora of ideas from our good friends at National Assembly. We organized those and we shared we are now sharing those ideas with interested constituent groups. And the first group we talked to was the Council of Music Program Leaders, and they are, I can tell you, they are just ready to run with these things. We talked to the ALF program, right, the Advocacy Leadership Force. Everybody is just stoked about how they can help. We talked to our roundtable policy members. Now, the roundtable policy, of course, they're not NAfME members per se, but they are our affiliate partners. And we wanted to make sure that they knew what was going on, and that we are hoping that our partners will take an active role in some of the ideas that we put forth in the document. And right after this call, I'm going to be talking with one of those said groups about just that. So, to your question, how do we make this a movement? Let me roll the tape back a couple of years ago, and I'll share with you our bookends. So the thing that we bookended the report with, or the document, the blueprint, were two documents. The Vision 2020 House Right Symposium, the House Right Declaration, and on the other end, the College Music Society Manifesto. Right. So if folks sort of shake their memories and they go back and reread those, you're going to find a lot of things in both those documents that resonate in the blueprint. Right. How does the blueprint differ from those two documents? Well, one of the ways it differs is that, first of all, we're several years later. That's an obvious one. But the second thing is that the Vision 2020 document, House Right Declaration, was put out to membership, and we sort of were like, okay, everybody go. And which was great. And I think we've seen a lot of changes in music ed in the past 20 years since that document came out that are reflective of what we talked about in the symposium and then the subsequent declaration. Similarly, when you read the CMS manifesto, which really looks at college music as a whole, and not just music education, but as a whole, we're starting to see some of those things, just now starting to see some of those changes occurring at the university level, which is really good. Neither one of those groups or those documents had the next component to it, which is what we are doing. And the next component is a concerted effort from all interested groups. Now, by concerted effort, I mean, how can we get this group mobilized? How can we get PMEA mobilized? How can we get NJMEA mobilized? Are there groups within PMEA that can help out? Now, by doing that, it doesn't mean we're not looking forward to individuals taking that bull by the horns. We're hoping and praying that individuals look at that document and say, I can make a difference in this way. And the other thing that we're doing is, in order to, again, to your question, how do we make this a movement? What I would like to do, and I just had a conversation with some of MTPI members yesterday, and NAfME's on board with this. We are going to try to put together some kind of a resource in some way where if people are doing some really good projects that speak to issues in the blueprint, that we're going to ask them to share that with us, give us an outline of what you're doing. We're going to share that with membership, and it's going to be accessible to anybody across the country who's a member, so that if I am, say, in Wyoming and I want to do something having to do with mentorship, and I'm looking to see, and Idaho has a great mentorship program, then I'm going to snag what Idaho's doing with permission, right? Because Idaho's going to give it to us, say, hey, anybody can use this as a model, and see, and maybe that can be implemented in that state, right? We're hoping that really good things and great ideas come out of PMEA, because PMEA has my heart, right? So that's kind of how we want to do this. And the other thing, not just sharing, but also celebrating those ideas. We want to make sure that everyone across the country knows that there are people paying attention to not just the problems, but also ways to shape and mitigate the next steps and push those things forward, so that we can see little by little how we're growing as a profession, and to celebrate those things. We don't want it to be a secret. We want to be able to share those ideas as often as we possibly can.
So you hit on it. A lot of what you talked about there was what NAfME partners and kind of the state MEAs can do. Right. But you did hit on there at one point. What can an individual do, or is there a role for an individual? So, if I'm a music teacher and I'm dealing with everything else that I'm dealing with, that very well, that they're dealing with in their day, but they say, boy, this makes sense to me because. Yeah, this was an issue for me, or this was an issue for a student teacher, and I really want to see this work for the future generations. So if I am, as I always say, Joe Q music teacher, right, and I see this and I'm like, well, I want to roll in this, I want to do something, but what is it? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, well, sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, yay that person or those people have that energy and the propensity to do that. I've been getting, since this stuff came out, we've been, you know, talking about it wherever we can, as often as we can. We get lots of people sending me an email or a text message. How can I help? And we're collecting the names of those folks because I think what we're going to have eventually are some subcommittees that can help out. But that's a little bit larger, I think, than I shouldn't say larger. It's just a little bit maybe off to the one side compared to what you're talking about. If I'm an individual, say I'm a high school band director and I want to help out, and I don't necessarily want to be on a committee, what can I do? Well, take a look at what those problems are and what the suggestions are towards mitigation. In fact, if you remind me, I can give you that list of things that we developed at National Assembly this past year because there's a lot of really cool ideas. But you can pick and choose. Here's what I can do. So, for example, if there's a problem with somebody not being able to participate in your music program because there's a financial need, can you partner with a community member, a local church, a local university, a local music store? Are there ways to partner so that we can do whatever we can to try to ameliorate or at least lessen those costs, right? Preparing for college admissions, part of this is going to be working intensely, I think, with university folks across the board to shift ideas about college admission processes. However, before that happens, is there a way where you can work with an individual? Now, I'm not talking about an individual to help them get through the door, and that could mean peer-to-peer tutoring. It could mean finding a university person, a pre-service teacher who wants a little field work and can connect with one of those kids who really is having a hard time preparing an audition, those kinds of things. And I think that there are all kinds of ways of partnering. I was talking to a good friend of mine who had worked on an El Sistema program out in the Midwestern part of the country. And it was going great guns for about, I'm going to say handful of years. I really don't know the amount of time, but for a handful of years at least. And just shared with us that the program is now defunct because it wasn't sustainable. And so I think that that's part of the challenge here is how do you make these things sustainable? And I think from my perspective, to make those things sustainable has to do with the buy-in that you get from students, families, community, universities, and continuing to develop relationships. Sometimes, and you alluded to this, Mark, we are so busy. We are just busy people. And sometimes because there are not enough hours in the day, sometimes our attention to relationship development sort of gets put on the back burner because we've got all these other things to do. And I would suggest that development and sustaining of relationships really should be at the front burner all the time. And I'm as guilty as the next person of having to really find time for that, right? So don't feel as though you're alone, right? I think that we as music teachers can feel isolated sometimes, even in a large city. We can feel like we're an N of one. And I would say to that person, you're not alone. I can help to connect you. Scott Sheehan, another Pennsylvanian, can help to connect you. We are not going to let people flounder. So if you have a good idea, or if you don't have an idea, but you just want to help, reach out to you, reach out to other PMEA leadership, and we'll get you going. The other thing I want to say about this real quickly is that the National Executive Board, we're going to talk this next week about the development of a new ad hoc committee that will take the place of the MTPI towards having a permanent fixture in NAfME. And we're suggesting that we call it the Music Teacher Profession Advisory Council. And part of that council is going to be making sure that all the states are connected to the things that are being started at the national level, because this is not just a national concern. This, like you said earlier, this concerns states, It concerns localities in the state. One locality might not have the same issues as another. So everybody really has a dog in the fight. And the more we stay connected as an association, national and also district and state, and we continue to grow and develop those relationships, I think we can continue to chip away little by little at each of these ideas. Now, the last thing I'll say about this, because I know I'm running a little bit long, is when I go out and do clinics, and maybe you do this too, it's one thing to yap at somebody for 45, 50 minutes. I always try to give the attendees homework, and I'll ask them, what is the one little thing that you can take away with you and do tomorrow? What can you do tomorrow? So to read the blueprint passively and not find yourself in it somewhere won't help us to push things forward. But if you read it actively and find yourself in it to whatever degree and can do one small thing in what you're doing in your school, those hundreds and thousands of small things will add up. And I think that we'll start to see shifting and revising over time. And I would say to you, if you do that one small thing, you need to let us know, because we want to applaud you for that, and genuinely applaud you for that, and to share your good success story with others, because somebody might be looking at what you're doing and say, boy, I can do that too.
Yeah, and that is such a fantastic point to end on, because we talked a little bit here about what can I do? What can I do? I think
Right.
it is also important for teachers, and maybe they'll see this as they read this, but just to think through this, to give themselves a little bit of grace and realize that you're probably already doing some of these things.
Right.
And that's important to remember, because that does help with the bigger picture. And the more that you're able to do it, number one, that's just good for the cause. But I think that then other music teachers will see it and say, well, that's all right, I can do that. That's a good idea. Because, your point, but, a student can't afford an instrument. Well, how many teachers still find a way to make it work? So it's important to maybe step back and do that self-reflection of, yeah, I am doing some of this stuff.
Right, exactly. And let me just say this as well. Folks who are listening and watching this might think that we're only talking about secondary folks. We're not. We are also talking about those wonderful folks at the elementary level. Really, that's where those seeds about being a teacher should be planted. And we need to be able to celebrate who we are as a teacher, especially at the elementary level, and give them those little ones, right? The idea that this is not only something they can do, but wow, isn't this like one of the best things I can do as a human being? And I think it is. So it runs across the board, and we're just so absolutely grateful for all the help that we've had to date on this. And I know that the numbers of folks who are going to provide their feedback and their ideas is just going to start to grow and grow and grow and grow. And I'm looking forward to that. It's a little daunting, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is exciting to watch this unfold. The fact that it is in motion is fantastic. So, Deb, thank you for all of your work on this. Thank you for joining us. We know this is not ending because, as we said earlier, you are President-Elect.
Yep.
So there's going to be a lot more work on your plate here pretty soon, but I'm just convinced you're not giving this up at all.
No. This is a life's passion, I think, and I'm happy that I get the opportunity to help out in some way. And shout out to all the folks who have done a ton of work on the interviews, the people who shared their ideas with us, the people who helped to write. I mean, it truly took a village to put all this together. I'm not alone in the writing or any of that. So thank you to all those folks, and to thank everybody who is thinking about how can I help. Give me a call. Don't be a stranger.
All right. Well, I'm sure we're going to have some folks taking you up on that. Deb, thanks again for joining us. And thank you all for joining us on this edition of the podcast. We want to thank our sponsor, the Grove City College Department of Music. We will see you next time.